Ah, perfect.
Awesome.
Perfect. Are you recording it to your computer, by the way?
It should be.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. If it goes to the cloud, I'll just forward that to you anyways.
awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Oh my gosh, don't worry. Don't worry at all.
Amazing. Okay. Let me make sure I have my questions ready to go here.
Okay.
Um, okay, so I guess we can start with anything you'd like to share about your story or maybe how you've personally struggled with stigma that's associated with being kind of in your role as a therapist and social worker.
Yeah. So it's actually funny because when I first got into this field, is almost when I first started therapy too. I started going to therapy in my undergrad in university, and I did it for a little bit. And then when I moved back home, I stopped it completely. And when I went back to school for my master's, I started it again, and it felt like this thing that I couldn't tell any of my peers about because of the stigma. And I was like, I'm in school right now to become a social worker, and it just felt like I should know how to do some of this stuff. And what I actually realized was that there were other people in my program who were struggling too on a mental health scale. And by being able to talk to them about it, and I was seeing the therapist on campus at the time. And so I had mentioned it to someone. And then a few weeks later, they had come back to me and they're like, I just started going to therapy too on campus. And it just then became this thing where it felt really open and comfortable to talk about. And then as I have progressed since then, it's now just become something I talk about. Like it's absolutely nothing. Like I will tell my clients that I have my own therapist. I tell my friends, I tell my family, and therapy in my family is so taboo as well. They are very much like old school and don't really believe in going to therapy or mental health or any of that stuff, despite me being in this field of work. And so when I tell them, "Oh, I'm in therapy," they're like, "Well, what do you need therapy for?" And for me, I'm like, everybody needs therapy. I think you should be in therapy. So it's kind of funny that way, but it feels like, or it felt a little bit scary at first to tell people that I myself was receiving therapy and that I was moving through my own challenges in life, and to feel like people, I don't know, there was a fear that people would judge me. I think that was the biggest thing, right? And I think that comes with part of the stigma. And I think for me, once I moved through that, like, I don't care if people know anymore. And if people choose not to work with me because of that, or if they choose not to respect me because of that, then that's on them. That's their beliefs. That's, whatever they have going on in their own life. And it has nothing to do with me. And so for me, it's really just been about coming into my own truth and speaking my truth and speaking what feels authentic, and not caring so much about what other people will say or what their judgments will be towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one thing I've heard a lot is that there's like this fear of being like not credible in some way, but it's like you said, everybody needs therapy and everyone has things that they need to unpack in some way just to move through life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that ties into too that whole notion of like you have to be in crisis and like have a super severe mental illness in order to receive therapy or talk to people about what you're going through. And that's just so not true. And that's the case for everybody, including mental health care providers. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny too, because I have found that the more I talk about it too, and I talk about my experiences being in therapy, the
Yeah.
more I hear my friends saying, "Oh, yeah, I started seeing a therapist," or, my therapist said this. And I'm like, that's a good therapist you have, like it's funny because I find the more I am open and talk about my experience being in therapy,
Mhm.
the more other people feel comfortable expressing that they're in therapy too. Like, I think it almost takes the stigma away from it. They feel a little bit more comfortable saying, like, oh, it's kind of like that, like a me too, right?
Right.
It's, yeah, oh, you're in therapy? Oh, me too. And it brings that connection a little bit closer, and it makes people feel like they're not alone in some of their struggles. And I think it just opens up the conversation a little bit more, and it normalizes it really. Like, yeah, if you're a mental health professional and you're in therapy, I think that's incredible. And it's also you leading the way, right? Like, if you are expecting other people to come to you for therapy and to do some of the work, then why not you be an example of that? And you go to therapy and you lead yourself through that work as well.
Yeah, exactly. So well said.
Thank you.
Yeah. Um, and I know, yeah, we've talked about like everybody needing therapy, but I think mental health care providers in any capacity are in a really unique situation where they're carrying really heavy stories sometimes. So, do you think there's any reason in particular that mental health care providers should um, seek therapy, maybe, especially?
Yeah, I think exactly what you just said is that oh, is it good? Yeah.
Yeah, it feels
I
very
think that we carry,
good.
okay. But yeah, I think that we carry a lot of people's stories. We carry a lot of the heaviness that other people bring to sessions. And if you I keep saying you, but I guess I'm going to speak from me. Like, if I didn't have my own self-care practices to work through it, I think it'd be that much more difficult to move through my day-to-day life, right? Like, I think the ability to almost compartmentalize a little bit, and then also to see a therapist. Like, sometimes I've gone to my supervisors just to say, hey, I had a heavy day today. I had a lot of clients who expressed a lot of heavy emotions. And now I just feel like I need someone to kind of talk this out with, because I'm feeling some emotions about it too. And I
Mhm.
think part of being a therapist or being a service provider in that way is that you really are, the way I guess conceptualize it is, I'm lending my nervous system to you. I'm supporting you in co-regulation. And so I need to feel regulated myself. I need to feel pretty solid and stable in order to lend that to you and support you in whatever it is that you're working through. And so if I'm not feeling stable and I'm showing up to my sessions unstable, I really think that people pick up on that. People pick up on those energies. The client will pick up on it. It might not feel like a safe container for them to then express or go deeper. I also think in this process of lending our nervous systems to other people and then kind of bringing it back, sometimes it can be a lot for us now. So now it's like, okay, I need actually someone to support me in co regulating. So for me to then be able to go and talk to my therapist or my mentors, it's again me looking and leaning on someone else's nervous system and saying, hey, can I be supported right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine it's really tough too with confidentiality and like having to protect like people's stories, right? And I'm wondering, yeah, how does that impact you, or how do you kind of work around that, like when you're talking to your supervisor or you just need to
Mm-hmm.
vent about, something really stressful?
Yeah. So in terms of the confidentiality piece too with that, so at least the clinic that I work at, in the um, consent form, there is a section that says um, that we have the ability to consult with like our team or our clinical supervisor. And so in that case, we can share a little bit more of what's going on for a client, especially if we need support with some of that. So still maintaining a level of confidentiality and not spilling the whole person's story out, right? But it does make it a little bit easier having that, especially with a supervisor. But I think in general, sometimes it is really challenging because we can't talk to people about it. Or if I'm in therapy with my therapist, I'm not going to, just start
Right.
talking about some of my clients because that's inappropriate. That's breaking confidentiality, in my opinion.
Yep.
And so that becomes a little tricky to navigate. And rather than in those situations going in and talking about, what's happening in other people's lives, it's more about, for me at least, tuning into myself and saying, okay, this is like I had a client who shared something really heavy, and now this is what's happening in my system because of it. So how can I work on my system to regulate myself rather than focusing on the other person and what they're sharing and what's been brought up in that sense. Does that make sense? I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. Like it's more about like how you're internalizing it versus the actual details of somebody's
Mhm.
story. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering, yeah, what are some of those kind of coping mechanisms or how do you kind of come down from that maybe at the end of the day?
Yeah. Oh, I love this question. I have so many practices because, well, for one, I think sometimes we need different things in different moments. And I tell my clients that too. Like, one skill might work one day, and the next day you might need something completely different. And
Mm.
so for me, it's really just tapping in and tuning into what I need. And so sometimes, like, I have a playlist where I just listen to like these 5 songs on repeat. And when I listen to those, it's like me just sending love, sending um, hope and faith and anything and everything I can out. And so by me just listening to those songs and kind of doing that, that feels really grounding for me. And once those songs are done, I'm like, okay, now I'm moving on and I'm coming back into my space rather than carrying other people's things. So that's one way that I do it. So yeah, listening to music. Breath work is a huge practice of mine. I know that you're familiar with that. So sometimes I'll just breathe. I'll take 10 minutes and I'm like, I'm just going to breathe all of this out and let that go. Movement, any kind of movement, my typical forms of movement, getting outside in nature and going for a walk. I try to go for a walk every day, whether it's the start of my day or the end of my day. There's a walk in there at one point or another. Um, Yoga as well. I do a lot of yoga, just like moving that energy out and really coming back into my own energy so that I'm not carrying other people's energies. And sometimes too, like the loving kindness meditation. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Um, oh, it's really beautiful. So it's the way that I like to do it and that I do it for some of my clients. Like if I've had a day where I am feeling a lot of emotions from another client, or I'm feeling just, yeah, I guess emotions are just like a little bit dysregulated for myself. Sometimes I'll sit there and what I like to do is I'll visualize the person in my mind and I just say these 4 sentences to them. So I say, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be free from suffering, may you live with ease and peace. And I just say those things over and over again until I feel a shift in my body, in my energy. And so sometimes I'll just sit there for maybe like however long it takes, 5 to 10 minutes. Sometimes I'll do it for all my clients that I've seen through the day. Sometimes I'll just do it for the clients who I think need it the most. And I send that out. And it really, it really shifts something within me. I can't explain it. It's really just a feeling. And so that for me is helpful. And even just practices too, like I shower at nighttime. And so usually when I do that, it's like a lot of visualization, imagining the day washing off of me, letting that go. Simple things too, like just getting changed after work, like changing out of my clothes and putting on like comfy clothes or something of that sort. That to me too is like, okay, I'm letting go of this day and I'm moving into my space. So I'm letting go of that energy and I'm moving into my own energy.
Yeah. Oh, I love all of that. And I think it's really amazing how like intentional you are about like because you said earlier about like lending your nervous system, right? And so coming back into your own nervous system and all of the different things that you mentioned are all connected to that. And I think,
Mhm.
yeah, like the term self-care really gets thrown around a lot on social media. And I think it's not all just like bubble baths and things. It has to be super intentional
Mhm.
and connect you back to your energy and your nervous system. So I love
Mhm.
that. And I'm going to look up that meditation for sure.
Yes, yes, do it. It's beautiful. I think it's called the meta meditation, METTA or META, something like that, or loving kindness, the loving kindness meditation. I think it'll come up.
Amazing.
Yeah.
We'll definitely look that up. Um, okay, I'm shifting a little bit and thinking about like being in session with a client and maybe they're sharing a story that's really, really relevant and related to maybe your own experience. And I'd love to know kind of what it's like to have to maintain like neutrality and kind of that observer position,
Mhm.
and how that ties into kind of everything we've been talking about.
Yeah, that's a tough one for sure, right? Like, especially if what they're sharing hits close to home, or
Yeah.
it's something that I've experienced in my own life or have gone through. Um, yeah, it's challenging sometimes for sure because
Yeah.
you really feel it. And so I think for me, what I try to do a couple different things, and it depends on the situation and it depends on the client for me at least. Sometimes, depending on what the situation is,
Mm.
sometimes I will share a little bit and say, yeah, I've gone through something similar, and just really provide that validation. And kind of similar to what we were talking about before in terms of like therapists or service providers getting therapy. Like I have um, a young client, like a 13-year-old, who always would ask me, do you ever experience things like this? Do you ever experience things like this? And it's funny because I remember going through school and them saying, like, yeah, if a client asks you something like that, you don't answer and you just,
Yeah.
you kind of flip the question back on them as to, like, why do they want to know this? And I think sometimes that's relevant. But sometimes I just think the other person wants to know that they're not alone. And so sometimes I will share and I'll say, yeah, me too. Like, even though I am a therapist, sometimes I do struggle with anxiety sometimes. Sometimes I do get really low in my mood and I just need to sit and cry for a little bit. Like, that's a normal human experience. And especially with the younger clients, I think it can feel really validating because I think they're still trying to navigate and figure out, like, is this normal? Is what I'm experiencing okay? Like, I hear often too, like, something's wrong with me because I'm experiencing this. None of my friends feel this way. And I think for me, if I were to just sit there and kind of be cold and try to turn it back on them, I just think that's not effective. um so yeah, sometimes I will share a little bit of my experiences with clients if it feels like that will be supportive for them. Other times too, it's really just reminding myself, and it's really a little bit of self-talk in my head too while the other client is sharing, and for me to say, hey, like, this is not your experience, Victoria, this is someone else's. Like, let them do what they need to do. And I also am a firm believer that we are all on our own paths and we are all meant to make our own mistakes and learn from our experiences. And for me to then come in and say, oh, well, this is what happened to me and this is what I did, I feel like that would be robbing them of their own life experiences. And so I think for me, what I really try to focus on is just offering some different questions that might prompt them to think about situations in or from a different perspective so that they can open their minds just a little bit more. But at the end of the day, I really feel like they need to guide themselves on their own experiences. And even if I don't agree with what they're doing, or if in my head I'm like, oh, I've done this before and that was the wrong choice, or um
Yeah.
oh no, or that was, that worked out for me, there for them, like I had to reach for that from myself.
Oh no. Shoot. Oh, there we go. Think I think we're back.
Okay.
We're good.
All right. But yeah, as I was just saying, like I think that um everyone needs to go through their own experience, and it's not my role to stop them from doing any of that. And so it's really just offering them the opportunity to think about situations from multiple perspectives, and then from there being able to do their own thing rather than me coming in and interfering with their process.
Yeah. No, that makes so much sense. And I really like that you said like sometimes it's helpful to share a little bit to know like you're not alone. And I think that's been really helpful for me too, like in therapist settings to hear like, yeah, an experience is shared. And even though it's like kind of my space to be talking and whatnot, it's helpful, yeah, to know I'm not alone, especially as a young person. I think when you struggle maybe more for words and describing how you're feeling and you're not as like settled in, you know, coming in and talking about some of the things that you're going through. And yeah,
Mm.
I know I don't have this question or I didn't send this as a question to you, but I'd love to know like working with youth in particular, how those interactions are different maybe than with adults, and like if kind of carrying their stories feels a bit different. And yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because youth and adults have similar challenges and similar problems, but they're just at different stages of their lives, right? Like, and I say it all the time, we all are just moving through this human experience, and we all feel like we're all built in with the same emotions, but we just feel them at different intensities at different times and for different durations. And so, yeah, working with youth sometimes it's I enjoy it. I really do enjoy it. And I think sometimes there's a lot more, I guess, psychoeducation that goes in with youth. And
Yeah.
they're a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess malleable, right? Like they're a little bit more uh, flexible, and at least my experience with some of them, they're not super rigid in their ways, and they're a little bit more open, where I think sometimes with adults they are a little bit more stuck in their ways, and they're a little bit less open to trying some different things out, because they're like, oh well, I've already tried that and it doesn't work. And I hear that all the time, and I'm like, okay, let's give it a try again, or let's maybe try it in a different way. Whereas some of the youth that I work with, they haven't heard of half of the stuff that I bring into our sessions together, so it's all new for them. And it's really cool though too, because when, at least with some of the youth I've worked with, when I bring things into their awareness a little bit more, they come back time after time and they're like, oh, you know what? I noticed that I was judging myself in this situation, or I noticed I was comparing myself there. And it's really cool because they're able to start to recognize earlier on in their lives when they're getting into some of these habits that create like sadness within us, or create or contribute to some of that low mood. Whereas with adults, I think it's a little bit different, because if they've been in this space where they are constantly in judgment of themselves all the time, or
Mhm.
if like they're playing the comparison game. It's a little bit harder to kind of get them out of that a little bit, because I think because there's more years, they've been doing it for a longer period of time. So like I said, they're a little bit more rigid and stuck in their ways, but that doesn't mean that they can't make any shifts and that they don't make any shifts, because they do. I see it with adults as well, right? Like they'll be like, oh, I didn't even notice I was doing that. Or, they'll be able to acknowledge like, yeah, I do that, but I've done that my whole life. And it's like, okay, so now we get to change that.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And somebody told me once, I'm gonna like mess up how it was described, but it's like when snow falls and you first make the tracks in the snow, like the more that you walk that path, like it becomes really, really like refined. And I think, yeah, that's, I guess the awareness of that piece I've noticed is much more prevalent maybe in adulthood versus like, yeah, learning a bit more as a kid. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that has to be really like, what's the right word? Interesting and just cool to interact with different people in their life paths like that. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
some
Definitely.
amazing. Okay, well, let's see where my questions are at here. Where do we want to go next? So I would love to hear if you have kind of an ideal picture or view of what like accessible mental health care would look like for mental health care providers, clinicians, everybody. Yeah, if that was perfectly set up, what would it look like for you? Big question.
Okay. I know. I read that and I was like, this is such a loaded question. And I find it so challenging to answer because, yeah, like in a perfect world where, like, maybe money didn't exist or things of that sort, like it would just be accessible and free for everyone, right? Like we'd all have the ability to do that. And yeah, I was thinking about this one last night. It's funny because I'm like, oh, and not even for like social workers, therapists, or mental health providers, but even for people in general, like the mental health system, I think is so unhelpful at times, right? And it's inaccessible in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
And it's frustrating because like I said before, I think everyone needs it. I think we all need therapy. I think we all could benefit from having somebody to talk to. And so, yeah, in a perfect world, it would be accessible for everyone. It would be like affordable. It would be something that, either your insurance covers more of it through work, right? Because I know with work, a lot of people's benefits cover a certain portion, but
Mhm.
sometimes people's benefits only cover, like I know my previous job that I was in, we only had $500. And if you think about it, like sometimes one session with someone can be like 150, 180, $200 just for one session. And so $500 is nothing. It's like two sessions. You get two sessions covered.
Yeah.
And so it just makes it that much more difficult for people to access it. And I know, like myself working in a private practice, I'm considered an independent contractor, so I don't have benefits like that. So when I do see a therapist, it's all out of pocket, right? And I think that's true for a lot of people too.
Mhm.
But I think because of that, it makes people not want to go and access it because they have to pay for it out of pocket. And rather than it being this thing that we do to prevent our mental health from becoming worse or to use it as um, kind of like a self-care practice almost, we end up using it as this thing where it's when we're already in a place where we don't feel like we can help ourselves, that's when we're going to access it. So I think that just in general makes it really challenging for
Mhm.
people. And so for mental health care providers, I think I think it should, honestly, I just feel like it should be a requirement. I think all therapists or, and like if you're in the mental health field, I think, uh, yeah, I don't know. I just feel like I'm repeating myself, but I just think that, yeah, it should be like a requirement as part of, I don't know, being registered with the college or something, because I just think it's so important. But again, like making it accessible, I just feel like, yeah, in a perfect world, it wouldn't be so expensive. It wouldn't cost as much as it does. It wouldn't be, I guess, like stigmatized as well, you know, feeling like, oh, if you're a therapist, you shouldn't you shouldn't need to access it. I think that is just false. I think that if you are in the mental health field, that is all the more reason why you should be accessing it on a regular basis. And if it was a requirement to be to be in the profession, I think that would be really cool. I think people at first maybe they would feel like, oh, I can't do this. But I one think it would decrease the stigma of it if everyone had to do it. And two, I just think it would make us all better therapists, better humans, better service care providers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you would set like the model. I would, yeah, that would be amazing. And I think, yeah, so important what you're saying about how it's just reserved kind of for those crisis moments right now because it's so inaccessible and insurance doesn't cover a percentage or only covers a certain percentage of it. And it just kind of
Mhm.
perpetuates that stigma of like, oh, you should really only need to go when you're like really struggling. And yeah, I mean, the most effective therapy I've ever been in is the like was years building like a relationship and figuring out like a pathway for what I needed and that kind of a thing. So yeah,
Mhm.
so important, everything you said.
Yeah, totally. And it's so like I share a similar experience too. Like the most amazing work that I have done for myself was when I was seeing my therapist once a week, every week, and I saw her for um a year or a year and a half almost.
Yeah.
And now I just do check-ins when I feel like I need it, right? Or like once a month check-ins essentially. But there was that time period where it was like, this is the best thing ever. Even if I had nothing to talk about that week, I would still show up and we would find something to talk about that I didn't even realize, oh, I needed to talk about this. Like it would just come up naturally. And I just think it's such one amazing work. Two, I also think it's just great for service providers to be doing their own work as well so that they can then kind of carry people through their stuff also. Like I just again, like I really think, I don't know how I want to say this, but let me think for a second. Um hmm. Yeah, I don't know, but my belief is almost like you can only take people as far as you have gone and as far as you're willing to go. And so if you're not willing to be vulnerable and to go into some of the depths and darknesses within yourself, then how can you expect your clients to do the same? Is almost the way that I look at things. And so for me, I'm like, I want to do this work for myself so that I can invite others to do it for themselves as well, because I know how powerful and transformational it can be to do that. And if I am expecting someone to show up in a session with me and wear their heart on their sleeve and be vulnerable and be open, then I need to learn how to be comfortable doing that as well so that I can hold space for someone else to do that.
Yeah. Mic drop. Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I think that goes for like everybody in every profession that you're in. Like the whole walk the walk, talk the talk thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah, amazing. Um, okay. I think I only have a couple of questions left on here. Um, let's see. I know we've talked about this one a little bit, kind of carrying those heavy stories. But I'm curious, like, I feel like there might be a difference between a story that's really heavy versus somebody who's potentially at risk of crisis, and kind of handling those. Like, you meet with a client and you're maybe a little bit more worried about them than usual. Kind of how do you navigate that when you go home at the end of the day, and like feel like, yeah, that you can maybe pass that off, or yeah.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the situation. So if there is a client where, and I've had this before, especially with more so with my youth. I haven't experienced this with any adults yet, but with some of the youth, sometimes we'll dive really deep into sessions, and at the end of the session, I'll ask them like a few questions to kind of assess the risk level. And if I feel like they are not well, or that they are not um, able to support themselves throughout the evening or regulate themselves throughout the evening, I usually have a conversation with them and ask them if they're comfortable with me calling their guardian, just to let them know, like, hey, can you keep an extra, like an eye out? Can you spend a little bit of extra time with them, so that you're not, so that like the client isn't just like alone in their room ruminating or going down like a deep dark spiral. So there's been a few instances where I have had to do that, and I've never had a client say no when I ask them that. If I say, can I call your guardian? And so that for me is like a big thing, because I can only do so much in the 50 minutes that we have together. And if I'm not feeling confident or comfortable leaving them alone after, then I just have that conversation with them and I ask them if I can call their guardian. And that for me, then once I do that, I'm like, okay, someone knows, someone in their house knows, and they're like, they, my hope is that they will be okay, because someone else who is with them knows that they're having like a hard time right now. So that's a big thing for me. um Really, like that, the safety planning essentially, right? Even with some of the older um like the older teenagers that I might work with, or like the younger adults, like even just going through, what can you do tonight, who do you have to call, who can be with you right now, just things like that, just really making sure that they feel supported, and that if worst case scenario were to happen, that they have a plan, that there's something that they can do, there are steps that they can follow if they go down that deep dark spiral. um, so that for me makes me feel really good and supported. And then usually in situations like that is when I'll really go into my own practices to do whatever I need to do to make myself feel a little bit more regulated. So like I said, all of those practices that I mentioned before, I would choose one of them, whatever one felt good in the moment, maybe even do two of them, and I would do those. Does that answer the question?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And 1 second, I'm going to close that window because now
Okay.
the lawnmowers are here. Okay. All the possible noise making people are here.
Love it. I, to be fair, I didn't even hear the lawnmowers, so that's okay.
Okay, that's good because I hope it didn't come through on the audio.
No, it didn't. I don't think it did.
Perfect. Okay. Amazing. Yes, that definitely answered the question, because I can imagine, yeah, that being really tough, especially if you like, of course, care about the person and carry worry with you. So yeah.
Mhm.
Um, Amazing. So I think I only have one more question here. It's kind of a broad one, but what do you wish your patients, clients, or people in general knew about your role as therapist, social worker? Or yeah, I guess what do you wish people knew in general about what you do?
It's a good question. I think I wish that they all knew that like we are human too, and we are going through the human experience, and we feel emotions all of the time too. And even though we have a lot of skills in our toolbox, sometimes it's hard for us to use them as well. Sometimes we can sit there and we know, oh, I know that this is probably what's best for me. And our minds are powerful and we'll say, no, like, I'm not going to do that. So I think just making people more aware of that we're not superhuman. We're not, um, what's the word that I'm looking for? We're not, oh my gosh, why can't I think of the word? Like, I cannot think of the word and I'm trying to think of another way to say it, but basically like we're not excused. We're not excused from any of the life experiences, right? Like it doesn't just skip us because we're therapists and we know a little bit more about like emotions and regulation and all of that fun stuff. Like it still hits us. We still experience all of those things. Um, and something else I wish they knew too is even though we're there holding space for them in their challenges, sometimes we're going through our own challenges too. And so it really does take a great deal of effort and awareness to be able to put our stuff aside to then be able to like be there for our clients and support them. And so sometimes it's just nice. I think sometimes it would be nice for clients just to recognize that a little bit and know that too, that we're not walking around as these quote unquote like perfect humans or like I said superhumans. It's just not, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And we're not immune to it. And yeah, life hits us hard too. Life hits us hard. And, we're all going through something at some point or another. And so I think just a recognition that we're here because we choose to be here and we do get enjoyment and fulfillment out of being able to hold space and support people through their journeys. And it's just, yeah, I think it would just be nice to know that we're also human beings on the other side of this as well.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that was a perfect way to wrap this up. And yeah, I guess unless there's anything else you can think of that you'd like to share, or anything, yeah, that's on your mind. I can leave it open for, yeah, anything else you want to give.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything else to say. I think we covered quite a bit, but
Yeah.
yeah, just thank you for inviting me to do this. This was fun.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And thank you for honesty and vulnerability and everything. And I know talking about our experiences sometimes can be like opening opening a wound or picking a scab a little bit. So I appreciate your willingness to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Amazing. Okay, let me get our recording stopped here.